Brett, but the toughest with you and stuff. He said the next your fingers are so sorry. Talking about I said, well, at least you had somebody to grab it for you, didn't have to worry about it. So what I'm going to do is call the
Good. You have Z-Man around? The captain? General?
Wasn't that bizarre?
Yeah.
I guess like we decided, I had this dog to go there. We decided the last minute. Jersey was not Jersey. So we just picked two random seats and we started talking to them. The lady, she's like, where are we from? Just sexually. The speaker from the veterans program. Oh, cool. I know. And he's talking to him. That's her major. Yeah, I'm working for him.
Okay.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Welcome to the November 27th special board meeting at 5:45, and we'll call the meeting to order. Let's start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Mark Hillman.
Here.
Angie Skilling. Here. Carl Palmer.
Here.
Abe Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Dahlke.
Here.
Amber Kirsty.
Here. We have a quorum. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our mission statement: the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Do we have any proposed revisions to the agenda order this evening? Seeing none, we'll move straight into community communications. This is a time to air concerns and express your opinion on issues. There should be no negative personal attacks. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during community communications do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, or viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area. We have two speakers tonight, I think. First up is Josie Pillman.
I am Josie Pillman, and I live in now. Dr. Zadowski, members of the board. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the SBMA could lead the state in academic excellence? We already know the way to do it. We just have to put a plan into practice. As a school board, you need to encourage your administrators and teachers to lead the way and to value truth and high morals. We already know that students coming from a traditional one dad and one mom family in a committed marriage relationship will do the best academically, socially, and emotionally. They will thrive. Not only that, they will be successful in forming healthy families of their own. Now we're soon talking about the next generation of students coming into the system. Truth is not subjective, it is objective. What I mean is that truth is always right and lies are always wrong. This is so whether you believe it or not. Truth is always true, whether in math, 2 + 2 always equals 4, or science, gravity always pulls objects to the center of the earth, or human sexuality. If you are born a girl, you are always a girl. Our curriculum and teachers must reinforce truth. Our gender policy plan must reinforce truth. One way to do this, simple, is by enforcing a dress code. Many years ago, we learned that men must dress like men and women must dress like women. That would be a simple beginning to addressing the SDMA gender policy plan, which has gone astray. The school board could also sift through the books and curriculum with a critical eye. Are truths being taught? What about history? Having just celebrated Thanksgiving and having studied the Pilgrims and their Thanksgiving meal, we know the God of the Bible whom they were thanking. Do we teach this truth or ignore it? Also, it is trendy to make Christopher Columbus a villain, toppling his statues across the country. He was a man of strong faith in God, not an evil character. Is this history taught accurately? Then we sanitize the socialist, Marxist, communist, and Muslim worldviews, somehow making them sound innocent or even helpful to our society. Wrong. They are dangerous and damaging. These lies ought not to be taught as truths in our SDMA schools. School board members, I encourage you to strive for academic excellence. Thank you.
Right, our second speaker tonight is Mike Cooper.
Good evening. Mike Cooper from Menomonie. And happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a unique holiday. George Washington suggested it, and it has a wonderful letter for the need for it, and you should read it sometime. I reflect on many blessings of family, friends, and America. I'm thankful for their Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and for the opportunity to speak before the board. Also for the Epic Times, which this week just happened to have an article with ideas for educational improvement, titled, Following the Amish Plan for Better Schools. It turns out that many of us would loathe that lead life as we know it to join the Amish community. But the fact is, they have a lot going for them. So when I recently ran across a few notes I'd taken on the Amish school system, courtesy of John Taylor Gatto's book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, I stopped to read more closely. In the 70s, Mr. Gatto explained that the state of Wisconsin tried to force Amish to assimilate into the state education system. Naturally met with resistance, the state accepted the following 7 demands of the Amish. Demands that place parents and community at the heart of the school system. And I'll just go over these 7 topics quickly. The first one, schools should be within walking distance of home. Second, no school should be so large that pupils had to be sorted into different compartments and assigned different teachers every year. Continuity of teachers and in the area tends to breed, it says here, and the smaller the school, the more likelihood there's a positive peer pressure to do right. Next, time to reset. The school year would be no longer than 8 months. A lot of people would appreciate that. Parental authority. Important decisions would be under the parental control, not that of bureaucrats, especially at the DPI or the Department of Education. Consistent values. Teachers hired were to be knowledgeable in and sympathetic to Amish values and rural ways. Teaching wisdom, not just knowledge. Children were to be taught that wisdom and academic knowledge were 2 different things. And finally, education beyond the classroom. Every student would have practical internships and apprenticeships supervised by their parents. There's just a lot of common sense in here that I think people could benefit by just reading the article. I think parental control and local control is way more important. We wouldn't have a lot of issues. Sorry. We wouldn't have a lot of these issues today if we focused locally and stayed away from DPI and Department of Education ideas. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Moving on, we have our personnel consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
I so move.
All right, motion by Carl, second by Mark. We have 1 retirement tonight.
Yeah, Rachel, I just want to say thanks to Mr. John Kitzman. He has notified the school district that he'll be retiring at the end of the school year. Mr. Kitzman's been a fixture at Menomonie High School in the social studies department. Done a great job, and he'll be surely missed. So congratulations to him, and Sam and her team, along with Mr. Drake, will do their best to try to hire a suitable replacement, but Mr. Kitzman will be missed next year.
Any questions or discussion on the personnel consent agenda? All right, let's vote. Right. and vote was unanimous. Moving on to the action agenda. We have 2 resolutions on our action agenda tonight pertaining to the referendum. The first is a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit by $4.2 million for recurring purposes. And we'll entertain a motion to, we'll entertain a motion.
I move to pass that resolution.
Second.
All right, motion by Dale, second by Abe. Discussion here? I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna read the whole thing. All right, make sure I have the right one. So the resolution authorizing the district budget to exceed the revenue limit by $4.2 million for recurring purposes. Be it resolved by the school board of the school district of the Menomonie area, Dunn and St. Croix counties, Wisconsin, that the revenues included in the school district budget be authorized to exceed the revenue limit specified in section 121.91 Wisconsin statutes by $4,200,000, beginning with the 2024-2025 school year for recurring purposes consisting of operational expenses. So this is the legal version of the same language we discussed at our special meeting on November 16th. Any questions or discussion on this?
Joe, could you make it clear that this is 4.2? It's not going to turn to 8.4 and all that again one more time? People are still worried about that.
Sure, Amy, thanks for the question. And this having a referendum is somewhat new in Menomonie, especially an operating referendum. And to your point, Amy, it is a $4.2 million referendum recurring, which means that the authority, if the referendum passes, would allow the school board to exceed the revenue limit by $4.2 million annually. It does not add upon itself. It's $4.2 million and that's it each year. It does not escalate to 8.4 and then 12.6. It's authorization to exceed the revenue limit by $4.2 million.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Should we go ahead and vote?
Rachel, I guess I also just want to point out, and I know we talked about this last time, when we put the survey out to the community and we were trying to project what the impact of the referendum would have in our community, we were anticipating that the mill rate would raise $1.25 for every thousand evaluation. And with the updated projections, now that we have more information from the state in terms of what our evaluations are, our new projected mill rate is actually 82 cents on the mill rate. So we did receive very good support through the community survey. It seemed pretty clear to me that a majority of our community supports the idea of a $4.2 million recurring referendum, and that's when people thought it was going to cost $1.25 on the mill rate. With the updated projections and the impact being 82 cents instead of $1.25, I would think that that would encourage more people to be supportive. We did see in the survey results that there were a number of undecided people, that they needed more information before they could decide whether or not they would support the referendum. I do think dropping that impact from $1.25 to 82 cents will probably have an impact on those undecided voters. So I think that's good news for people who might be interested in passing the referendum.
I guess we've discussed this at length for a long time, but maybe this is the time to say, I think, this district has been extremely careful and responsible with its funding for years. The budget's always been very tight and well thought out. Always kind of making the most of every dollar while also planning ahead and making sure that the future is well planned for. And I think that this decision is exactly in that tradition of
being, making the most of every dollar and really making sure that we can provide the operating funds we need for the district to make sure we can meet our mission statement and serve every student in the community. So thanks for all the work that's gone into really making sure these numbers are precise and we know what they mean and we know how, why the numbers work out the way they did and that they're actually, I think going to be really, as you said, very clear to the community as people start discussing it in more depth.
And I don't know if board members have received any additional feedback since the meeting 2 weeks ago, but I have been interested to hear from people in our community who are surprised to see how funding in Menomonie, particularly the amount of revenue that Menomonie is able to generate, has really fallen behind the state average. It also is less than many of the comparable schools, for instance, in the Big Rivers Conference. And when you look at the history of revenue limits, particularly where that's most of our revenue is dependent upon the revenue limit, when you look at that history, Menomonie has been a low revenue district really since the revenue limit started in the 90s. But the difference between the state average and the difference between most of the Big River schools compared to Menomonie stayed about the same until about 2011. But beginning in 2011, that gap between the state average revenue limit and what Menomonie was able to accomplish in terms of revenue limit began to get wider. And it's gotten wider and wider over the years. And it really is a disadvantage to the students and the staff in our community when you think about other places that have significantly more revenue to be able to apply towards public education in their schools. So I do think that this referendum could have a large impact on our district's ability to continue offering a terrific education. And with the new biennial budget not accounting for the expiration of pandemic funding and not adequately addressing the high rate of inflation, something like this is needed if drastic cuts are to be avoided. So with that, I guess unless there's any other questions, that's all I have to say about the referendum tonight.
I think too, showing that the district's really been frugal, even though we're well below state averages, look at all the huge number of districts that have had to go to referendum, whereas we have not been able to. I can't remember the exact number, but we are certainly in the minority of districts that have not had to go to referendum previously.
Yeah, the number of districts in the state who have not needed to have an operating referendum particularly is really shrinking. And I think the last numbers we saw from Baird, I believe it was about 80% of school districts have gone to referendum, 82. And to think that we've made it this long without that being needed, I really do think that is a real testament to previous school boards and this school board making very wise decisions. And even looking to the future, even looking at this year's budget when times have been tight, the board still has prioritized upkeep on our facilities, making sure that we provide a compensation package for our staff that is very competitive. And especially with staffing shortages occurring all across the area, not only in the world of education, but especially in the world of education with the teacher shortage and making sure that we are able to have qualified, talented people working with our children, that's getting nothing but more difficult. And without these kinds of resources, I'm really concerned about what that's going to mean for the future for schools that don't have the resources to apply to their staffing and to their facilities and to their curriculum and transportation and everything else that goes along with it.
I guess one thing I would add, and there's been a lot of discussion about recurring versus not recurring in regards to the ask of a resolution or referendum. And there's two pieces that come to my mind with that. The first is, you could put a 10-year time frame on this referendum potentially, and with inflation and with changes in state aid over time, this amount is going to not be enough someday, right? If we would have done this 30 years ago, we we would have run out by now, right? So it really is about, in the interim period, trying to get back to where we should be accounting for inflation. And secondly, having a longer period of time to be strategic is very important for a body like this board to be able to say, we know we are not going to be worrying about, can we pay our teachers? Can we do what we need to do 3-4 years from now? Will all of our energy be consumed every 2 to 3 years by trying to find money? And instead focus on the stuff that matters. What are the test scores? How are the kids doing? I travel in a lot of circles. Folks that vote one way, folks that vote another way with kids. Nobody I run into really doesn't like our school or our district. They're generally happy with it. Some are more happy than others, certainly. But no one says that their kids aren't getting a good education here. It's the little things that people want to do. We want to keep doing that. And that's why I'm going to support this resolution.
And to Carl's point, we just don't know what the future does hold. And the concern about a non-recurring referendum is that you create a fiscal cliff. And that's part of the reason why we're here tonight. I have spoken to some of the former board members who are, a couple of people I talked to were surprised that the district was in this situation where a referendum would need to be considered. But then when I explained to them how, the state froze revenue limits the past couple of years, and then consider what happened with inflation being so high, it made perfect sense. So while we anticipate and hope that this referendum would put our district back in a position, for sustainability for a long period of time, a lot of it's going to depend on what happens in Madison. I would sure hope that the legislature would continue to prioritize revenue limit adjustments that do not keep up with inflation. To Carl's point, with what we've seen in the last couple of years, that inflationary impact is huge when you talk about a school district.
We're also going to hear later tonight about our state report cards. And I think, we have a lot to be proud of and that we're going to talk about with those state report cards, and a few things to think hard and pay attention to. And when I think about what it would take to continue to make that progress and to sort of make up some of those gaps, if we had to do that without our instructional coaches or without our intervention specialists, without without the best staff in every room in our building, in all of our buildings, I think we have to make sure that our schools are funded as we go forward. Final thoughts? All right, let's vote. All right, motion passes unanimously. Our next action agenda item is a resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit by $4.2 million for recurring purposes. And we have an 11-page document that Joe says I don't have to read in its entirety. This is a resolution to authorize the election for the resolution we just passed. We have to do both of them.
I move to approve the resolution providing for a referendum election and questions the approval of the referendum. Resolution authorizing the school district to put on the agenda for the spring election.
Thank you.
February election. Is that clear enough?
That's good enough. I think that's it.
I second.
All right, motion by Carl, second by Mark. You don't have to read the whole thing, Mark.
Is that good enough?
That's good, yeah, thanks. There was a question earlier about the space on this agenda that has information on municipal clerks, and I think we have cleared that up, right? But that each municipality that posts this notice will have a different municipal clerk that information will be filled in as it's posted. Any questions or
That was
discussion?
my question, and it was answered, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, just make sure everybody knows that. It's not an oversight that is left generic.
Yeah, makes
Okay,
perfect sense.
yeah. Any other questions or comments on this resolution? All right, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. Great. Now we're on to our discussion items. First up, our state accountability report cards.
So I appreciate the work of Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, Brian Seguin, and his team, along with the building principals. They have taken time to review the state report cards. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian to present this to the board.
All right, thank you very much. So this is an annual report that we bring before the board. Each year, the Department of Public Instruction releases district and school accountability report cards. Last month, I talked about last spring's state level assessment, and that is one of many factors that goes into these school and district accountability report cards. I'm happy to report that once again, our district meets expectations on this report card rating system. It's important to note that the report cards, both at the building and at the district level, in addition to the spring assessment from the previous year, incorporates at least 2 additional years of state level assessments that are given in the spring. So at the elementary level, at the middle school, that's the Wisconsin Forward exam. At the high school, it's the ACT suite of assessments. So ACT Secure and the ACT assessment. A few years ago, the state added in some additional areas that don't factor into the overall score that I think helped to round this out a little bit. As a district, we had been reporting on that information to the board level in our report card 2.0, which we'll talk a little bit in the next agenda item. But the state has added in information related to participation in things like theater and music, industry recognized certifications, advanced placement courses, and other dual enrollment courses. Some other things, however, that do factor into the overall score of the different reporting areas includes things such as not just the achievement of proficient, advanced, or basic, or below basic, but also growth from one year to the next. So it takes a look at how groups of students did on the prior 2 state level assessments and how much growth they make from year to year. That is a sliding scale based on district poverty levels as to how much weight is given to straight achievement and how much weight is given to growth. As a district, we get more weight in our overall score on growth from one year to another. But then other post-readiness indicators also factor into this. Things such as how students do on their 8th grade math assessment, how students did on their 3rd grade reading assessment, and then also things like chronic absenteeism and graduation rate. So all that stuff gets pumped into a bunch of different formulas. You get more credit for the most recent data than you do for data from a couple of years ago, and that's how we arrive at the different scores. So last year, when our kids took the assessments and you roll that into the information from the other years, we ended up with 4 out of our 5 elementary schools exceeding expectations. 1 met expectations, our middle school met expectation, and our high school fell into a category of meets few expectations for this most recent report card. A couple of things to point out just when we look at the scores themselves. Our score at our high school was 0.5 point from that next category, so we fully anticipate that score will be right back there next year. Downsville Elementary's category, or their score, was 1/10 of a point from the next category, which is exceeds expectations. So, again, it's a sliding scale, and what's nice about this data is, when you factor in multiple years worth of data, you kind of eliminate some of those peaks and valleys that you might see if you just look at 1 year's worth of data when you go forward. We like to take a look, even though this is a lot of different information, we like to roll this into other information we have available in the district to help identify our overall school improvement plans that we talk about each year. But a few things that I wanted to point out as far as strengths. I already talked about the different ratings and how our buildings did this year. I want to point out that at the elementary level, in addition to 4 of those 5 buildings earning ratings of exceeds expectations, River Heights, there exceeds expectation. That was the 4th year in a row that they are in that category. Oak Lawn Elementary, it's the 3rd year in a row that they have seen an overall increase in their score. When we take a look at our overall ELA and math achievement scores, and again, it's multiple years worth of data, they come in at a level above the state comparable. That has not always been the case year in and year out. So we've gotten into that correct category where our achievement as a district as a whole, for all levels, when you aggregate that together, comes in above the state comparable. 8th grade math exceeds the state comparable. 3rd grade ELA also exceeds the state comparable. It's the first time that we've had that in, I believe it's 5 years that we've had that 3rd grade ELA score above, and it's been a steady climb to this point. So something we wanted to celebrate. When we take a look at the percent of students participating in dual enrollment courses, we continue to see a number of students that do that, and that exceeds the state comparable. Same holds true in our theater courses and our music courses as well. So when we talk about the importance of whole child education, that is something that is rolled into this information. Taking a look at some areas where we want to take a look at focusing in as far as some growth as a district. We did see on this most recent report that the number of students that are being reported in work-based learning, saw a little bit of a decrease on this report. Again, that will kind of ebb and flow over time, as well as industry-recognized credentials. It's important to note that the theater courses, the music, the dual enrollment, industry-recognized credentials, that's a 1-year report that we get on the report cards. So we do see that one kind of peak and dip a little bit more than on the overall report card itself. When we take a look at our ELA at the middle level, we've identified, even before we received this, that we have some work to do as far as our overall growth from 1 year to the next. And then we're seeing that we want to focus in on our growth at the high school level. And that's kind of been a regional trend that we've noticed. So we're trying to figure out, locally as well as within the region, what are some things that we can do in that area as well when we take a look at growth at the high school level as well. So some next steps that we've identified and our teams have been working on, reviewing how we have our dual enrollment courses as well as advanced courses coded, making sure that we have those coded in ways that we're getting credit for all of the work that our students are doing. We think we've identified any potential areas where we can improve on that. And then also taking a look at our improvement plans, monitoring those by trimester and quarterly intervals, making sure that we're not only making progress toward the goals, but the action steps that go along with that, we need to adjust them as we go forward. When we take a look at some of the other pieces, we've noticed some nice gains at the elementary level based on some of the work that we did out of our ELA and math program reviews. So we're taking a look at what are some next steps at the secondary level that will go along with that. And then also, when we take a look at our summer school offerings, are there some things that we can be doing to better align those areas that we need some support for our students in leveraging that summer school offerings as well. We reported to the board last spring and again this fall on our multi-level systems of supports and our intervention programs, continuing to have that team work closely together to make sure that those programs are providing support to students that are needed and will be beneficial to them. I'm not going to open up each individual report card for you. They're included in the background, and I know several of you have had a chance to go through and take a look at them. One of the things that I do want to point out about the report cards themselves is, years and years ago, we just got a score and we just got proficiency levels, and that was about what we got with that. This really dovetails very nicely with the improvement efforts that our building level teams have done over the years, and helps us not only identify kind of the big picture pieces, but then are there some specific subgroups or target groups within buildings or across the district that we need to be responsive to. And the nice thing that we've noticed over the years is by the time we get to the point where we receive our state and our state report cards for our buildings in our district, is we're not seeing surprises per se with the information that's being presented. Our teams have gotten really good at identifying that throughout the course of the year. So it helps to validate the work that we've prioritized. In some cases, a little fine tuning, but again, it helps support those continuous improvement efforts. Really, if I had to boil it down, what are the things that we need to celebrate? We need to celebrate that the growth that our students have shown over the last several years is leading to overall increases in straight achievement levels, which for a number of years, we didn't see those overall achievement numbers start to creep up. We always did a nice job with growth, but we're starting to see the payoff from that. What we need to now focus in on are our lowest performing quartile of students, continuing to make sure that we're moving them forward and that we're providing opportunities for all students. So with that, I guess I'll open it up for questions.
Well, and just real quick, I want to make sure we don't bury the headline here. The headline is that the school district in the Menomonie area met expectations on the school district report cards. And that's a real tribute to our students, our staff, our families. It measures a lot. And to think that our kids in Menomonie are achieving at that level is wonderful. Do we want to keep improving? Absolutely. And like Brian just talked about, there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of plans in place. And this is something where the work never is completed. But we will continue to move that way. And one document I really like in the attachments is the SDMA school report card history. And when you look back at the history, I believe the report cards have been issued over a course of 12 years. There were a couple years where the report cards were not issued due to COVID or due to change in legislation. But in all those years, the school district of the Menomonie area has either met or exceeded expectations. And I think that is something that we can be proud of.
Focusing on the areas of desired growth, I'm curious if you can dig in a little bit to, so I'm looking in particular at the high school report card and on the target group, which I gather is, you said, like the lowest quintile or quartile of performers in the data set. I think the number that to me that strikes me the most there that I'm curious what we can do to address is the chronic absenteeism, which is a pretty big gap between that and the rest of the population. And that seems like a very tough problem to solve because it involves a whole number of social and environmental variables. So what, can you just explain a little bit more of kind of what the approach is to the chronic absenteeism?
Absolutely. So couple things as I do that. First off, that target group outcome, several years ago, we used to receive what was called a closing gap score, and we would take a look at our lowest performing subgroup of students, and that shifted to this target group. So regardless of demographic group, who are our lowest performing students in each of those categories, achievement, growth, chronic absenteeism, and graduation, regardless of a group that they're from. So chronic absenteeism is identified as a student who misses at least 10% of the scheduled days for any reason. It could be illness, it could be they just chose not to come, any reason that they are marked not present at school for something that's not school related. So,
I'm sorry, I think you said this, but that includes excused absences?
correct.
Okay.
Yep, it would include an excused absence. The only thing that would not fall into that category would be if the student was absent from a class because they're on a school field trip, because from an attendance standpoint, they're still at school. Our staff at the high school level, and quite frankly, at all of our levels throughout the district, have been working very hard to help communicate with families not only the importance of being at school, but the impact that not being at school has. And you're right, it's something that on the surface, we look at it and say, well, we want to improve that score. Students just need to be at school and that score gets better. But there are many, many factors that come into why a student is not present in school. So communication has been one of the main things. We have, actually at the high school level, we have a small team of 2 that are participating in a workshop coming up here, to take a look at not only what are some best practices that maybe we don't have in place, but then also just spend some time collaborating with colleagues in other districts. Again, from the building level, our administrators and our teachers have done a nice job. I know Dr. Zadowski has done some articles in the past related to the importance of attendance as well. But communication really is one of the key things with that.
One of the initiatives this district took on, 2 years ago, was the every student having a trusted, identifying someone they trust in the district as kind of a personal contact. And I think, I'm curious if that program of building those connections can help reinforce attendance in that way, where, there are many reasons someone might not be at school. One of them is they might not feel they fit in, or might not feel on a personal level, kind of that sense of either comfort or safety. And so I wonder if, drawing on those connections and having those individuals be the ones who help follow up might be a way to seem to think about. But yeah, I think it's a very challenging problem, and I'm hoping we have all sorts of creative solutions to go forward with it. Thanks.
Kind of related to that, as you look at absenteeism, do we know how many of those students also have IEPs, or are they lumped into a different category? Like, are some of those kids being addressed with absenteeism as part of an IEP?
The short answer is possibly. Now, as far as how they're reported, an absence is an absence regardless of what type of service a student has. And the other piece that goes into this, it's not really a question you ask, but once a student hits that point of being chronically absent, whether they're 2 absences into being chronically absent or 10 absences into being chronically absent, they fall into that category as well. Now, IEPs are going to have specific goals associated with them, and there may be a student that attendance at school, maybe something that is being monitored as part of those goals. Generally, there are other goals that are identified, but I do know our case managers pay very close attention to whether or not students are in class or not.
So when you look at the demographics, there's a graph, student group, chronic absenteeism rates, all students, African American, students with disabilities. Yep. Does that include learning IEP, minor stuff, or just certain levels of?
All.
Okay, so those, that would break it out then?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought it was interesting noticing in the target group outcomes section, and I hope I'm getting this right, for the school district as a whole. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was in the high school. It was interesting, it looked like the target group outperformed the non-target group in growth at the high school, which I thought was a good sign that something's working, even as we're continuing to face challenges. You started to allude to this in your overview, but in the looking at like kind of the district as a whole, sorry, going back and forth, you know, when you look at this page on growth that breaks it down by all the different demographics, you do really notice that almost every kind of marginalized demographic is underperforming in growth compared to sort of all students, but you know, whether that's English language learners, students with disabilities, students of color, and not by much, but I'm just curious if how that is kind of being addressed specifically going forward.
Yep. So one of the things that our MLSS team takes a look at is, you know, what are the areas that we need to focus in on. When we take a look, and again, whether you look at an individual building or you look at the district as a whole, in some cases, you know, like we look at the district as a whole in the area of math. We take a look at growth in our district is doing really well overall on this report. And then we have some buildings where you may see that be the case for both ELA and math, and then some areas where that's not. So one of the things that our teams do as part of this process on an annual basis is have conversation about what are we doing in that building? Did we learn something from each other? Another thing that we also have access to is the ability to take a look at a spreadsheet that kicks out this information for every district and every building in the state. So it allows us to identify similar districts demographically and size, as well as buildings, and then we can go through and see how are we doing in relation to those comparable districts or comparable buildings, and then I do it on an annual basis. Our high school team is in the process of doing this now at the high school level, reaching out to colleagues in those districts to have some conversations about, you know, talk to me specifically about what it is that you're doing. And in some cases, it's something very specific. In some cases, they're trying to figure out why they're finding the success in that area as they can. But one of the things that I really like to do, and I think is helpful, we will take a look at not only that growth piece, but then the proficiency breakdowns, and take a look starting with the below basic category, and take a look at those percentages from one year to the next in trying to move more students up a category. Because the way that these report card scores are generated, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this, but students whose proficiency levels fall into that below basic category, you don't receive points in the overall calculation for the report card. So if we can move students up in their overall proficiency levels, you know, in addition to seeing that growth, then it also shows up in the score as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So the growth could be so when they're measuring growth, it could be within a proficiency level rather than jumping a proficiency. Yep. Interesting. Okay. Yep. Thanks. Other questions or discussion on the accountability report cards before we move on to accountability report cards 2.0, which I assume Brian will continue to talk to us. All right, let's move on to accountability report cards 2.0.
All right. So the report card 2.0 came out of some discussion several years ago where we took a look at what the state accountability report cards didn't measure. And in those first probably 6 or 7 years of the report cards, it was all based on student achievement and growth and graduation and attendance. But if students were involved in extracurricular, co-curricular activities, that didn't show up. If students were taking dual enrollment courses or participating in things like Elementary Science Olympiad, those types of things didn't show up in the report card. And we knew that that was an equally important part of students' experience when they were at school. We wanted to have a way in which to share that information. So over the years, we've made a couple of tweaks to what the document looks like. And what we have included in the background is our report from last year. And to help make this a little bit easier, last year we shifted it into the format that we have right now. And then we either have a green arrow or a red arrow to indicate whether or not we've seen an increase or a decrease from the previous year. So for your reference, I included both this year and last year's accountability report card, so that you can take a look at the actual numbers from one year to the next. But you can see that we have several areas that we've seen increases from the prior year, in some cases some pretty sizable increases. We have some areas where we've seen some smaller dips when we take a look at the prior year. But when we take a look, we've seen an increase in the number of students taking AP exams, as well as earning scores of 3 or above, increase in students taking transcripted courses. We've seen a increase in the percent of students with 5 or fewer documented behavior incidents. Our activity account, or student activity count at both middle school and high school has gone up, as well as the number of students participating in our arts integration activities, student council, and as we go forward. We have seen some dips, while we saw an increase in the number of students taking AP exams and earning 3s or above. We did have slightly fewer kids taking the AP courses. We've noticed this last year we had a slight decrease in the number of students earning state-sponsored employability skills certificates, as well as the number of students participating in youth apprenticeships, in our GIAC program, in Battle of the Books, and Science and Media. So when we take a look at from one year to the next, again, we're going to have some peaks and valleys in there, but as far as what the student experience looks like, we feel like the report card 2.0 does a nice job of helping to share kind of that other side of the story. More and more districts are starting to have a supplemental report like this. I'm very proud of the fact that through the work of our team and our staff and our district, we were one of the first districts that I'm aware of that did something like this, which really was, I think, a very nice addition to being able to report on this. So, any questions?
Yeah, Brian, drop in state skill certificates is fairly notable, 100 to 64. Was that a certain type of skill course that folks moved away from, or is it a range of things?
So I don't know off the top of my head. I haven't picked it apart to see which specific ones they earned the prior year. What we do notice is from one year to the next, just the number of students that enroll in the courses that will be feeders for that. The other thing is we have seen an increase year after year in the number of students who are participating in our academy programs, so like the Business Management Academy. And not all of our dual enrollment courses have a skills certificate that goes along with it. So like a state certified skills co-op. So a student who leaves school at the end of the day or comes to school late because they're working on the job, they're eligible for, many of them are eligible for a state skills co-op certificate. So if a student isn't doing that, and if we have fewer students doing that, then we're going to see some more numbers there.
So it may be that the 2.0 report card is migrated or grown up a little bit, and that the same number of kids are really out doing these meaningful things, but some of them are funneling out of a couple of these categories into categories that aren't quite on the report card yet.
I would say anecdotally that's probably accurate without looking at the specific numbers.
I'd just like to say I appreciate this. When it first started, it was pretty minimal, and I've really seen it grow, and it's got some very good information, so thanks.
I apologize if I asked this question a year ago. And I was curious, we've got participation counts for student activities at both middle school and high school, and obviously that counts many people twice, right, if somebody does more than one thing. Do we have counts for like discrete individuals who participate in activities?
So at the high school level, when Michelle Guy Holloway was here last month, she did the unduplicated total.
I
So
don't think she did, but I'll go back and check.
yeah, I'll double check. I'm pretty sure that on that one, I thought she had the individual number of students because we reached out when we were looking at our numbers. Where this is just, it's the raw number. So if a student participates in 3 activities, they report it 3 times. Historically, that's how we reported it, so we've kept it that way.
Any other questions for Brian on the accountability report card 2.0?
Just for reference, I think the report that we had a month ago, I just pulled it up in board docs. So it lists each activity individually, and so the numbers per item, right? You can see per activity, but I think the sum is still adding those. So,
I could do the work.
I apologize.
I could do the work and find it. All right. It would be interesting to know if that, unduplicated number is holding steady or going up and down, but, all right. Moving on. We are discussing new course proposals for 2024, 2025.
Brian, you're on a roll, keep going.
This one will be relatively sufficient. Happy to take any questions along the way. At the high school, going into next school year, we do not have any new courses that are being proposed. We are looking at the possibility of piloting an additional academy with the CBTC on electrical maintenance, pending some space availability. They get some nice updates to the lab space here in town to do that. But then the other information is in here just as informational. At the high school in art and family and consumer science, there are a number of courses that they are making some changes to the names. We put them in just more informational because in about a month or so, or I guess 2 months, you'll get a list of courses that may or may not be recommended to run. So we like to make sure that you see main changes ahead of time. The main reason for the main changes is to have them align more closely, in some cases, to some of our transcripted courses and coursework at the post-secondary level. So with that, I'll take any questions.
So I'm excited about the electrical maintenance thing. That sounds super cool. How close are we to that being reality, 50-50 or further than that?
The short answer is it is something that, as long as there's space in the course at CBTC, and we have students who are interested in doing that. We already do electrical maintenance as part of our summer school programming, and just would be looking at having students be able to do that here, again, pending space availability. And the reason for this one is it's offered at the Menomonie campus.
Well, it's a good one to have. Can you remind me of what, or Joe, does doing this cost us? And I'm asking the question because as people are talking about referendum and having budget, and is this one of those things where when we have enough funds, we can give these opportunities to kids in the community?
So yes, there's a fee associated with that. But in a case like this, to be able to offer the experience, we would likely not have enough students enroll to have a dedicated instructor teach the class. So it actually is more cost effective to do something like this than to try and fill a very small section.
But the bottom line is it's not free.
No, and what Brian's alluding to, when we have enough students to participate in a program like this, we can reallocate resources. If there's 30 kids in this class, well, that's 30 kids out of other classes. But sometimes, especially when you're piloting or you're growing the program, there is an in-between time period when it's not quite as efficient. But we think it's a very important offering, and I think your point's well taken, Carl. These are the kind of things that we've been prioritizing in our school district. There are so many students that are graduating with college credits, and in some cases college degrees with a 2-year degree from CBTC. Those are the kinds of things that are possible when we make an investment in our schools.
Any other questions or discussion on the new course proposals? Moving on. Thank you, Brian, for all your presentations tonight. Discussion of the 2024-2025 district calendar.
So it's my turn, and 2 weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, we showed you a very, very rough draft of a calendar for next year. And it was pretty rough. Since then, we got additional input from the principals. We also, have taken some more looks at it, and it's getting closer. There's still more work that needs to be done. We're meeting with the principals again tomorrow. And one of the biggest things is we plan to get this out to our staff tomorrow, so we can get feedback from our staff. We also know that after having the break last week, an extended Thanksgiving break, this is the first year doing that. We've been collecting anecdotal feedback today. Certainly there's a lot more feedback that we want to receive through the QIC group. So far it's been very, very well received, and that is included in this initial draft calendar for next year. But again, I just wanted to throw this back to the board. Are there any additional thoughts, parameters, questions, anything you would like us to consider as we bring this to the principals tomorrow and then to our staff on December 4th?
Can you clarify for us if there are any substantial changes to this calendar from the last time, in terms of the days of school, not in terms of the calendar?
No, it's very similar in terms of the number of days of school and where the breaks are and such. Most of the changes that I would anticipate to occur at this point would be lining up the parent-teacher conferences, potentially, shifting some of the term ending and beginning days, depending on what the principals may have to say on those. But no, it's a pretty standard calendar, very similar to what we had this year, and still getting done the first week of June.
We talked a lot about chronic absenteeism a little bit ago, and I think I will be really interested to hear what the building principals and the QIC have to say about the two kind of major changes that we made this year with the jumpstart days and the Thanksgiving break. What the impact of, or anecdotally, what people think the impact of those changes is looking like.
That's a really good point, Rachel. I think some people going into last week thought, well, the district's taken off because of deer hunting. Well, that is not the case. And, there are many deer hunters in the school district. There's many that aren't. But regardless, what we saw is whether it be deer hunting or family vacations or people traveling or, working, there were many reasons why people were missing school. And our attendance was so poor during Thanksgiving week, we decided this year to have that week off. And it will be interesting, Rachel, to see how that impacts our overall attendance for the school year.
I really like this calendar, so I cross my fingers there aren't any huge dramatic changes, but of course I'll do what you need to do. I think there's a lot of nice features built into this. The jumpstart days, the way that the breaks line up seems very logical to me, and it looks like a nicely spaced out here in terms of when there's weeks on end versus breaks. I'm curious if you can clarify or reiterate the emergency makeup system that we're now on and would be in that year as well.
That is one of the challenges, is that with the jumpstart days, we reallocated some of our contractual time. And it does put more pressure on the snow days. However, as you know, we piloted remote learning days last year, and that was fairly successful. We're hoping that we don't have many snow days this year, but in the event that we do, using remote learning days is something that we plan to use to try to avoid going into that second week of June. We always could bring students back. We're going to try to avoid that as best we can. But that would be another challenge with this calendar. There's just not as much space for makeup days. But I do think with the capabilities that we have, we can make that work, and certainly we will continue to watch that as we get through this winter, and we could make adjustments in the future if needed.
Any additional comments on the calendar? If not, we'll move on to the budget plan and timeline.
So I appreciate Leah putting this together. This is a very similar plan and timeline that has been successful in the past. Board members, you've seen this. We bring it to you multiple times a year just to remind you of the process. It feels like we just got done with the previous budget, but because of all the referendum work we've been doing, we've already been living, at least in my mind, and Leah's mind, I'm sure too, we've already been living a lot in 2024, 2025. And that's kind of the challenge, is you end up kind of living in 2 budget years at once, sometimes 3 when the audit's going on. But anyway, you can see that the process is just beginning. There's a lot of different check marks here. One thing I will say is that with the referendum that's now going to be on the ballot for sure on February 20th, based on tonight's action, there will be a little bit more attention to the preliminary budget, and perhaps even a delay depending on what happens with that February referendum. It may make sense to hold a little bit. We're so far ahead with our preliminary budget because of all the work we had to do with the referendum. I think we have a pretty good idea of where things are at. But I would say after February 20th, we'll be able to dial things in pretty quickly. But it all culminates, a year from now, when we get to the end of October and the board sets the budget and levy for the 2024-2025 school year. And then in November of next year, all the tax levies will be certified to the municipalities. Any questions, or would anybody like anything changed on the timeline?
All right, thanks for that update. And our next agenda item is a discussion of the parameters and plans for sharing referendum information.
So again, now that the board passed the resolutions tonight, there will be a referendum election on February 20th. And certainly we all want to make sure that we follow all the rules and regulations as it pertains to sharing information with the community. Obviously, it's fine to share the reasons why the referendum is being brought before the community. In our position in this type of situation, using public, funds and publicly funded equipment, it is not appropriate for us to advocate for a particular vote, either on the yes or the no side. But it is very appropriate for us to share information with the community so that community members can make an informed choice. Typically, what you see in a referendum situation is the district hosting a number of informational sessions, both in the district and potentially outside of school buildings, and opportunities to get to people that otherwise may not have that information shared with them. A few other ideas that we have discussed would be having a dedicated web page on the school district website where information can be housed and shared. Information such as a presentation slide deck that shares the basics. Also a Q&A area. So as questions come up, we're able to answer those, and many times those questions are repetitive. There's similar questions that people have, and that's a good opportunity for us. And then also voter information. I think it's important, even though it appears that more attention has been placed in recent elections for voter information, people knowing where they can vote and such. It's always important to make that readily available so people are able to cast their vote. We do plan to mail a newsletter. We saw in the survey results that a majority of our community members prefer to receive information from the school district, either in a newsletter or brochure form. Also, email was highly preferred, especially by parents in the school district. And then in terms of presentations, I already mentioned in the district, in the community, and also virtually for people who may prefer to participate or learn that information in the comfort of their own homes. And then finally, social media. We saw in the survey results that while some people use Twitter still. Facebook is the preferred mode, so we would certainly want to use Facebook for anything that's shared on social media. But really, this is an opportunity for board members, if you want to provide any suggestions or any direction in terms of what you'd like to see.
Maybe just maybe just clarify something in the various WASB guides, in case people haven't dug into them. So the way I read them, the short version is that the district per se, as a public entity, right, can share information about the background, the reasons, what's on the ballot, and what the situation is, and that there is an election, and how one goes about getting to the polls and registering to vote. District resources may not be used to say vote yes or vote no in particular, but that there is an election, this is what it's about, and make your personal choice, and please be a responsible citizen and get out there and vote, yes or no as you wish. Right? We can't say that. The district per se cannot do that. However, I think the WASB referendum guide is also quite clear that outside of the resources and professional role of the district, whether it's someone who happens to be employed as a teacher, happens to be in the school board, whatever, happens to be employed in the district, on their personal time with personal resources, they are of course free as a citizen to engage with the community however they live. So I just want to make that clear that there's a personal versus district resources distinction to make in terms of advocacy.
And I think it's vitally important whenever writing postings that you state very clearly, these are my personal views, not those as a board member or the board itself. There may be value to a very brief, whether it be a video of FAQs or a little post on the webpage as well of information. Not everyone likes to read, not everyone reads at the same level, and some people may just want to watch a 2 or 3 minute video, and I don't think it has to be professionally done. I mean, that scares people away a lot, but iPhones do a pretty darn good job these days. So whether it's, Rachel as the board president saying, here's what the board is putting forth, or Joe, or I don't know how that difference that makes, but
How do you do on TikTok?
I can't do all the dances, but maybe a little video bit would be helpful to some audiences.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I think the what's currently on the website has a link to that Boswell video that's like 30 seconds long. That probably isn't what we need. I like that idea of something nice and short. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
I like all the ideas.
Are you volunteering to do a video?
I could.
All right, good to know.
I do think, obviously I think you will be under a lot of, have a lot of personal demands on your time, Joe, throughout the next several months, or a couple months. I think on that list, in terms of how you use your time, I think you mentioned presentations in district and in the community. I personally think a good role for the administrator to have professionally is to perhaps present to things like the county board or the city council, the other institutions in town for which things like taxes are relevant, where on a professional level talking about here's what our budget looks like, here's what we're facing, and here's why in this community that we share as taxing entities, why we're asking for this. And the other advantage of that is by talking with people, say the county board has 29 members, as I recall, who are deeply involved in their communities and can share that information to the people they know as well. So it's a very high impact way of spreading information, I think, on a personal level.
Just to piggyback on what you said, I think it's important that, for like Joe's time, is maybe to come up with some kind of slide presentation or whatever, and maybe some verbal, or video in there, embed in there or whatever. But then it's one thing that he can share at all the different places. He doesn't have to come up with something from scratch each time.
I do think we should also talk, I think Gabe's point is really good when it comes to some of the other local governance places where it's really important maybe for Dr. Zadowski to be there. And then also talk about how we can sort of share the load on some of those too, and what are community groups or spaces that board members can or should, go in there as a substitute. Maybe using the same slide deck if appropriate. and I don't mean to suggest we figure that out tonight, just a thought.
I will say that when I was involved in a referendum in Cadott, it was a building referendum, not an operational referendum, but similar process. One thing I would be sure to do would be to let board members know ahead of time of any presentations that are scheduled. Not that all 9 board members need to be there. In fact, it'd probably be preferred that not a quorum of the board would be there. But I do think that if board members, a few board members, or at least one board member can attend, I think that goes a long way to showing the community and demonstrating that this is, represented by the board. So even if board members aren't necessarily the ones that are going to be providing the presentation, being there and then, having the opportunity to maybe add in commentary as appropriate, would be something to consider.
That's a really good idea.
I also think it's really important moving forward as we create like the slides or the, if we have materials that are meant to be read, that they're kept as simple as possible, because I know that all of us could talk at length about why we need the referendum and what our perspectives are. And I appreciate that, especially Joe, like you know so much about like how school finance works. But when I hear advocating for non-readers, I am a reader, I promise, I like to read. But some people do not. And so I think, especially when we're used to getting like very short videos that we just scroll through, that we have to also think about how we present the information.
That point is very well taken. I think it's very smart, Dominique. And what I would propose is that I work with the administrative team and put together a draft presentation to bring to the board at our next meeting on December 11th, and the board could provide some feedback in terms of anything that you see as good or that needs to be improved. That way it's not just me or the administrative team that's putting this together.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to check in, so regarding the webpage, we have right now, a page where there's consolidated information about the, what's been happening so far in terms of the referendum guide. Is that something that we are able to just kind of keep there and continue to add to and potentially add other media to if it's, as we make them?
Yes and no, and that's something that I'm sure Katie can help us envision, but right now we just have the guidebook itself on the district homepage, but we could dedicate an actual page where more than just the guide could be housed. And, not only do you have a spot where you're housing it, but then you also can, tie those links into social media or email those links, but having that essentially online library of resources, I think, is very important.
Yeah, I see now it's just a PDF that is on the homepage there. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think having a dedicated page that is linked right on the homepage, it's easy to find, and that has maybe all the very detailed information, but then also the simple version is a really good idea.
So unless there's other comments, I think I have some pretty good direction to get started and bring you back information on December 10th. At the same time, if you reflect on this, laying in bed tonight, feel free to send me an email, shoot me a text, give me a call, and the more minds we have working on this, the better.
Sorry, Carl. One thing I haven't heard a lot of discussion on yet is how we're communicating this process to students. I know that there was some concern from our student representatives, it's on their radar, and I imagine it's going to be a conversation in a lot of homes. And so a very simple way of talking about this to students so that they're not nervous about something that they might not have a full picture of is something I would really like to see us tackle as part of this communication package.
Very good, thank you.
Well, we would generally say stuff should be written at a 3rd grade level. That's what we say in the hospital when you're talking about medical stuff, because it's so easy, right? So hopefully some of that material would be even relevant to school-aged kids. I was just going to add too, as we're trying to coordinate if there's events or things, we all have to still keep in mind the walking quorum issues and the communication issues, and it'll be extra important that Joe coordinates who's going to be where, so we're not all replying to all and running into any issues with that.
Thanks for that reminder. I also really like the idea of a Q&A, and I wonder if, of course, anyone could email you or any board member anytime. I wonder if it makes sense, I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but to create a simple way for people to submit referendum-specific questions, whether that's like a link from the website or another option.
Yeah, or a dedicated email address. Yeah, I think that's something that's pretty common. But I would say one of the biggest priorities right now, in your immediate thoughts, would be to think of anywhere that you would like a presentation scheduled. I know county board was mentioned. I've already been in communication with the leaders of the city of Menomonie. Certainly could visit some townships. Be happy to do that. But if you have specific groups or events that you think is important that we have a presence at, please get those to me as soon as possible, because the calendar part of this is the part that I think is going to be very challenging. And if we can get that done, I think that needs to come probably and be a high priority as we continue to develop the materials.
So maybe an obvious answer to that, I think that it's important to visit each of the grade schools because they represent geographically the region. You get out to map, you get, to Wakanda, right, River Heights, you're getting out throughout the community, Townsville. And secondly, I think, those could be facilitated by PTOs or PTAs of those districts as well, and the principals, of course. And secondly, of course, the various combination of booster clubs that we have, I think as a resource of people who care about the district and what is happening in the district and how it relates to the activities that they're deeply involved in, that's a really key community. And I'm not quite sure what the right, how that communication happens with those as being kind of these quasi-private organizations, but that's something for you to figure out.
But I would really appreciate it if you think about it and shoot me an email. Not that you have to repeat that, Abe, but if you want to, that'd be helpful. But yeah, any other ideas as well?
I would also like to see just a general for the public, like either here or, I don't know, if we can use the resources like maybe the shared classroom or something, someplace, that public can come in and, and hear something, their choice, and maybe have it videotaped. And, so people can watch it live stream so they can watch from home too.
Yeah, the other nice thing about doing a recorded presentation is that we could then post that,
Yeah,
so that it'd be available on demand as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Is it possible, I guess I'm thinking about open record laws, but can we have a place where all the board has access to an ongoing, or constantly updated list of the places that you either have scheduled or a list of ideas that could be shared, Google Sheet?
I can share information with the board, but board members cannot be populating information.
Sure.
So I will share district plans, and then we can always bring those back to board meetings to discuss them.
Sure.
But know that there should not be a shared document where
Okay.
board members are actively contributing.
Right, but I guess I'm not necessarily even thinking about us adding to the document itself, but to see, if you get an idea in and add something to the calendar in between board meetings, that other members can kind of see that that's there.
Yep, shoot it to me and I'll make sure if we have some sort of consolidated document where it's not just going to be 50, separate emails.
Sure, right. And then we could reference, so if something pops to mind, it has to have thought of this, we could go look at it.
I was just thinking that maybe just a calendar, like how you do you say the calendar where you're going to do your presentations for like the health insurance and stuff. I think we just make up a calendar and just put it on board docs or wherever, then we'll know where you're going to be when.
Right. Any other comments or discussions? Please. Silence yourself, don't go meeting. All right, let's move on to review of extracurricular staff contracts.
So this is a standing agenda item. You can see the activity from October 20th to November 15th. Unless there's any questions, this is for the board's information.
Any questions or discussion? All right, moving on, items related to our next meeting dates. Upcoming December 4th, which December starts next week, or Friday. December 4th, QIC meeting here at 3:50. We have a regular board meeting on December 11th, and the diversity committee meets December 18th at 3:50 here. If there are no questions or discussion on that, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. By Abe, second by Dominique. Oh, well, all right. Moved by Amber, second by Dominique, third by Mark. Stand adjourned. Fourth by Mark, I'm sorry. Fourth by Mark.